Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Today I'm checking out the brand new Corsair Obsidian Series 1000D Super Tower case. I wouldn't say this is going to be a comprehensive review, but it will be certainly more involved than a simple overview. And of course I will be installing the foundations for, well, my mega build. Let me just start though by saying that for this content, there's been a little more fumbling around in the dark than usual for a few reasons. Firstly, I have no instructions at all, no manual, nothing. I guess the manual wasn't included with this early production run. And Corsair hasn't provided me with any digital copy either, so there hasn't really been much to go on for this one. I have no specifications, no spec sheet, no official facts or figures, so I've had to work out pretty much everything for myself. What I do know is that it's called the Obsidian 1000D, because the name was on the box, and it's bloody big, ridiculously big, as you can no doubt already tell. This build will replace the Obsidian 500D that was here. The 1000D hasn't crushed the computer that was previously here. I just took it apart and removed it. But yes, this is the new background PC for all my videos. And it won't just sit here as a showpiece. I will use it from time to time, though mostly just for gaming. Okay, so let's talk about the video title for a minute, CoffeeRipper. I had initially thought to call this build SkyRipper, as the plan was to use that little ASRock Mini ITX X29 board that you might have seen in a build that I did quite recently. And then I was going to stick the Core i9-7980XE on that, why not? And then also put in the MSI X39 Gaming Pro with the Threadripper 1950X. And if you're a little confused at this point, I should mention that this Super Tower can fit 2 desktop systems, but I suppose given the size, it's hardly surprising. Having thought through the initial plans a bit more though, it became clear that while very insane, kind of awesome, the SkyRipper build was ultimately a bit pointless. That's assuming you don't need 2 productivity monsters in the same case. The problem I have right now, and I admit it's somewhat of a high class problem, but the problem I currently face is that my main PC uses the MSI X39 Gaming Pro Carbon with the Threadripper 1950X. It's a great system and it makes my video editing and encoding work a breeze. However, from time to time, I do like to actually relax and play a few games when I'm not benchmarking them. And while the 1950X is fine for the most part, it's not the ideal gaming solution. I have run into a few little problems here and there. And while I know there is a better gaming experience to be had. So as a result, I sometimes find myself playing on my Core i7-8700K test system. And because that's used primarily for benchmarking and not gaming, it's not really the ideal setup. That being the case, I think it makes more sense to drop the Skylake X portion of this build and replace it with a Coffee Lake Core i7-8700K. So that's what I'll be doing, meaning that this build houses an 8700K gaming rig along with a 1950X workstation. Now that's the stuff of dreams. Okay, so time to talk about the star of the show, the Corsair Obsidian Series 1000D. Some of you might have caught wind of this Super Tower a few months ago when Corsair and Amazon accidentally leaked information about the upcoming case. I'm actually surprised this didn't happen sooner, as I agreed to a 1000D embargo with Corsair way back in December of 2017. The plan at the time was to create a build series in January, but due to various issues, the release day was pushed back till now. Although I don't know for sure, I assume there was some kind of production issue with the front glass panel, which features curved edges in the leaked photos, but this has now been replaced with a flat glass panel, which doesn't really look as sleek, but possibly allows for greater airflow, so it's likely a more practical solution in that sense. So the 1000D is the new flagship case from Corsair, and it's expected to cost about $500 US, which is a lot, but for a case of this caliber, it's actually surprisingly reasonable, at least in my opinion, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the video. For now, let's go over the specs. So the case measures 693 millimeters long, and then it's 697 millimeters tall, and then it's 307 millimeters deep or wide, whichever one you prefer. Basically though, that gives it a volume of 148 liters, and that makes the 1000D roughly 30% larger than the 900D, and well, that was already a comically large computer case. The 900D was also incredibly heavy at 18.6 kilograms, but brace yourself, because the 1000D has packed on quite a few extra kilos and is now almost 60% heavier at a whopping 28.5 kilograms. Forget about your back though. What's the structural integrity of your desk like? The reason for the massive increase in weight is largely due to these just absolutely huge glass side panels. And there is a glass panel on both sides of the case. Then we have the glass panel on the front of the case, and then there's a neat little strip across the top of the case, which is also made out of glass. The 1000D follows the styling of the 500D, the case that I had here previously. And well, in my opinion, I think that's a good thing because I really liked the styling of that case, and it had a bit more character than the Obsidian models that came before it. So like the 500D, you do get those fantastic door hinges. They're a bit beefed up on this model, obviously, because we have this gigantic glass panel. And the glass panel is, again, fixed in place via magnets. If I just, there you go, that holds it quite nicely. You don't really have to worry about the doors swinging open when you move the case because there is just absolutely no way you're moving this case with the two glass panels on. So you would remove them first and then attempt to move this beast. And even if you had big arms Tim by your side, it would still be a big job. Okay, so I'm not going to cover every last detail of the 1000D in this video because it would be a half-hour long video of the case, and I don't really have all the components to do it justice just yet. So rather, I'll quickly just point out the design aspects and features of the case that I really liked, and then mention a few things that I feel can be improved. Things that are awesome and worked really well include the removable dust filters, which I'll show you some B-roll of those, but basically you open the door up and then there's a big filter at the top and a big filter at the front. There's also one at the bottom for the PSU. But yeah, getting at those panels is really easy and then you can clean them out, slide them back in. It won't slow you down too much. The I/O panel at the top is fantastic. There's enough USB ports there for two systems and you can configure those however you like. Some can be attached to the mini ITX rig in the bottom while others can just go on the full-size ATX system. There's also a pair of USB Type-C ports, which is of course very welcomed. For those of you wondering, only the power and reset buttons for the main ATX rig are found on the front I/O, and then around the back you will find the power and reset buttons for the little ITX system. One of the coolest features are the fan trays. With the 500D, these were removable, so you could install the fans and radiators outside of the case, and that just made the installation process a bit easier. And then once you were done, you just slotted the trays with everything installed back in. Very nice system, that. The 1000D, though, takes this concept to the next level with sliding rails. For much easier access, the trays unlock via a single thumb screw and slide right out of the case. This is a seriously cool design element that made installing the 11 fans in the front and top of the case just a breeze. In total, you can install 13 fans, 8 120mm fans in the front, which is what I've done. Then you can put 3 140mm fans in the top, and again, this is what I've done. And then you are meant to be able to put 2 120mm or 140mm fans in the rear, which is a bit strange because I couldn't actually get a pair of ML140 fans in the rear of the case. They just simply didn't fit. And upon closer inspection, there's only 260mm of space here. So I'm not sure how you're meant to squeeze 280mm worth of fans there. It's a bit odd, that. At the front of the case, down the front panel here, there is a 20mm gap on either side, and that allows for airflow. And while a ventilated panel would have no doubt increased airflow, this design isn't really that restrictive, and with 8 front-mounted 120mm fans, you can just feel boatloads of air being sucked through this panel here. So I don't think airflow is going to be a problem in this case. The top panel also features 4 main ventilated sections, each run the entire length of the case, and they have a height of about 10mm. So overall, that is a large open section to let airflow into the top or out of the case. The feet also raise the case about 20mm up off the desk or whatever surface you have it on. Ventilation here isn't really an issue, but you do have the PSU, which will be drawing, or could be configured to draw in cool air from under the case. So that's important. And the feet do extend the entire length of the case. They are made out of aluminium and they are quite strong because, well, the case is extremely heavy. Around on the opposite side of the case, the 1000D takes cable management to the next level with a pair of barn doors. Open them up though, and you have a massive sort of basement section or back section, whatever you want to call it. And here we have a pre-installed Commander Pro, half a dozen 2.5-inch drive trays, 5 3.5-inch drive trays, and a whole lot of space for hiding cable mess, which I very much appreciated in this build with all that RGB fan action. The basement section is 490mm wide, 490mm tall, and 70mm deep. Opening up the left side door reveals a massive interior ready to take advantage of an open loop cooling system, or, well, a few of them. With just the fans installed like what I've done, there is 580mm worth of clearance for graphics cards, so it's fair to say you could install a super thick radiator in a push-pull configuration without any issues there. It's also possible to install air coolers like what I've done, and they could stand as tall as 195mm, but this really isn't a case where you want to be using air coolers. Sadly, this is how I'm forced to configure my system for now, but in the future I do plan a rather crazy open loop system. Finally, the PSU shroud does limit the power supply length to around 220mm, as you still need to squeeze the cables in that space. For such a massive case, this does seem a little limiting. That said, you should be able to cram in something like the Corsair AX1500i without much trouble. Installing the ATX PSU is a bit of a pain, as you do need to remove the shroud, and this means disassembling the ITX system if you've already installed it. There doesn't appear to be any other way of installing or removing the PSU or adjusting the cables, at least as far as I can determine without an actual manual. A removable bracket at the rear of the case probably would have helped with this issue, so it's a bit annoying that Corsair's overlooked this. The same is also true for the SFX power supply, but because that's located in the basement or back section, you can access that directly without much trouble. One thing I will note is that I feel like the entire ATX motherboard tray needs to be shifted up about 20mm. This would give the ITX system more headroom and improve compatibility. I'm really not sure why there's so much headroom in the top of the case. Even with a 60mm thick radiator and a push-pull configuration, you'd still have a good 30mm of clearance between the motherboard and the fans. The rear fan location also needs to be stretched out a bit so you can actually install a pair of 140mm fans. I'd also like the ability to mount a 120mm fan just here behind the graphics card, or just in front of the ITX motherboard, so on top of the PSU shroud. This would just help force a bit more air over the ITX board's VRM, and really this is a much needed feature when you install something like a Core i7-8700K. So the 1000D isn't perfect in my opinion, but it's still pretty close, and I don't really see any deal breakers here, especially for those wanting just an absolutely outrageous build using custom liquid cooling. Again, I do plan to liquid cool my 1000D build, and it will happen in a future video, so just remain patient for that. I know I have to. For now though, I have installed the foundations, which include the MSI X399 motherboard, along with the Threadripper 1950X and a Vega 64 graphics card. And then of course for the ITX gaming build, we do have the MSI Z370i Gaming Pro Carbon AC, with the Core i7-8700K, and then of course the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X Trio. It's impressive that the 1000D actually manages to make the Gaming X Trio look somewhat small. I mean, it's a truly massive graphics card, and just look at it in there. Look at it, little guy. For now, I filled the case with Corsair ML series fans, and they will remain in place when I upgrade to the liquid cooling radiators and all that stuff, hopefully in the not too distant future. The 1000D, I admit, looks very barren without any liquid cooling in there. Obviously, this case is designed to take advantage of liquid cooling, and something like the Thermaltake, the Tower 900, without liquid cooling, it really just doesn't make sense. So you can imagine a pump and reservoir here, maybe two of them, some massive radiators here, and some hard tubes running all over the place. It's going to look pretty awesome, I think. The Corsair 1000D is a super impressive super tower, and at the suspected $500 US price tag, it's actually quite reasonable, I think, considering everything you get and the build quality. But talking about the value aspect of such a product probably is a waste of time. I imagine even at $500, the 1000D will be one of the cheaper components featured in almost every build destined to end up inside this behemoth. This really isn't the kind of case you'd even consider if your budget didn't have a 5-digit number attached to it. I can already imagine some of the comments in the comment section below, but let me just say that, yeah, it's massive and it's over the top, but that's the point. Of course, it's more practical to build two separate systems, so a separate gaming and a separate workstation PC. Two systems in a single case doesn't really make that much sense, but that doesn't mean it's not awesome, because, well, it very much is. Even though two separate systems is more practical for a number of reasons, I personally would go for something like the 1000D. Just the wow factor alone, and it's just a lot of fun building in it and something a bit different. And if you're going to be spending that kind of money on two systems potentially, then why not make it one really big, unique one? And well, that is going to do it for this one. If you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more content. If you appreciate the work we do at Hardware Unboxed, then consider supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time. You can't see me now. I'm gone.